This is the first issue with the Flipside punk poll results. Taken last issue, mind you. This turns out to be a regular yearly feature. Well, the punk scene is where you find it, and we certainly are finding it. It's like the Adolescents, Annie and the Subtitles. That's a interesting name. Detours, Agent Orange, and Social Distortion are popping up with a good attitude and great sound. The parties in our local neighborhood, Fullerton, Placentia, Whittier, are happening for once, and we forget about the violence at the bigger shows. Orange County even has a big punk festival put on by Eddie at La Vida Hot Springs. It lasted all day until the cops broke it up. The staff has perked up, with Michelle and Helen becoming stronger contributors, and Pete getting back into heavy photography now that he has a new dark room.
Then
I see your germs. Is that a Velcro badge back there on the bed?
Yeah, armband.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. One of one of the armbands that they made about 20 years ago that ran that they did with Shane. So
Well, because in the early days, the germs were still together. It was about 1978 or close to 79. Darby had dropped his Velcro band, and I found it at a party, and I held on to it, but he was whining so much to Lorna that I shouldn't have given it back to him, but it stopped him. It stopped him from whining.
That way probably worked pretty good for getting things done.
Yeah. Who knew how it would turn out, right?
Yeah.
We were just a bunch of kids. I mean, you were a lot younger too, like 5 years younger than.
Yeah.
But I wanted to touch at a point here in 1979 when the Adolescents started. It was my first cover of Flipside with Fear. So that was 1979 was a turning point for both of us. You know, it really changed our lives.
Yeah, it did.
That was such a great time, you know, and a change in the scene, the old crowd transformed into the new. And that's what I'm doing to the documentary for Flipside. I just interviewed Larry Lash, original staff, and Tori Paisley. He went from punk rock and Whittier to Cornell University, has a PhD in guitar, and now he's teaching. So it's amazing. I had no idea.
That's really amazing. Anyone heard from Al? I haven't heard from him in.
No, the last I heard, his I guess girlfriend, I'm not sure if he married, but she passed away about 3 or 4 years ago. That's the last I heard about him.
Wow.
And Pat used to communicate with him, but he stopped communicating about that time.
Yeah, he just kind of went off grid, and after that whole ROTS thing, that was it. That whole ROTS mess, the debacle, I think that just kind of very disillusioning, and I remember that whole thing going down.
Bad the demise of Flipside was. I was, you know, I wasn't around, so I feel sorry, but
yeah, well, what had happened was that the distributor handled the most. It's one of those, when you count too much on one distributor and that distributor fails, it's like everybody that counted on that distributor to fund the next project, right, to be paid to from Peter to Paul and back and forth, just it's just staying one step ahead. So you don't get that distributor money, right? Then there's nothing to fund the next magazine. So what a mess.
Yeah. But you know, there were kind of, when I was there, I always edited a lot of the stuff, you know, that made it more acceptable in the sense of sexism and things like that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's impossible to do, you know. But that type of situation, you know, maybe a compromise could have helped.
Yeah.
But I don't know if Al was handling it as much then. We were pretty tight scene, you know, we ran the ship tight. And after, in the 90s, from what I hear from my brother Gus and other sources like Cake, he says it was run a lot differently. And then when Todd Taylor took over, it changed again. So it transformed.
Yeah, when they were over on Harkness, I started hanging out and going down and goofing around down there, and they were running it out of a right across from PCC, and it was on Harkness, and it was a second story, like, you know, mixed use residential kind of office. It was like right across from like a Carl's Jr. It was a really good location as far as, you know, foot traffic and for people to get there, and you know, it was good location, really good location. And I liked that office. I actually thought that was a pretty fun little setup. But
yeah, that was in Pasadena, right?
Yeah. And yeah, your brother was there. I'd see him down there, and I'd see, of course, Todd was always there. Al was there a lot. Always working on machines. He was, you know, really more, he was doing the machine, you know, working the machines and getting things going. And your brother would always be there trying to transfer something or making some video matching audio and doing all kinds of shit like that. But anyway, so that was fun. It was a fun place. It was a fun place to go and hang out. And it was nice because it was, you know, for me, it was close by. It was like maybe, you know, jump in my car and it was 5 minutes, maybe, you know. I couldn't walk it. It was too far to walk, but it was, you know, really a mile.
Well, you might have known of the house he lived in on, I think Rosemont or somewhere close to there. Yeah, I think he still lives there. So really? I was thinking maybe someone could show up and knock at the door and say, are you still alive?
You know,
I want to, but I'm not sure,
I don't
you
know.
know,
You
how
know,
he
he
would.
knows where to find us. Like
Yeah, he
we're
does.
easier to find than he is. So I think if he wanted us to, if he wanted to be found, I really think that everything that went down at the end was just was too much. You know, whatever happened, whatever went down at the end, it was enough to just make him throw up his hands and say no more, because he disappeared after that.
Yeah, because I hear, this is from, several people, that people broke into the office and stole a bunch of photographs and all the Flipside stuff and sold them on eBay. So now there's certain photographers that have come out and they're showing the work that they've done. But I know in my heart that that's Al. I was standing right next to him when he
Mhm.
did his work. So there's nothing I can do. It's up to Al to, call his marks in, and he won't. So this
I
this
think that's
this
part, you know, that I think is part
continues.
of it. Where Flipside started, I don't think any of you guys thought in those kinds of terms. And I think when it got to those terms, people were
Yeah.
stealing the stuff to sell it. It was collectibles and shit like that. I think he was
Yeah, I
done.
see it all the time.
I think he, at that point, it was like there was money being made by somebody, but he wasn't getting paid for the, Rots wasn't paying, he wasn't getting those money to keep the business going. And then somebody's breaking in and stealing shit on top of it. And I pretty sure I could have guessed who it was. Um, um, but it also, I think that would have, knowing from where you all came from, starting the magazine, fanzine to the end, I would think like at that point, you just go, fuck, I put all this effort into it, and this is how it's repaid. People steal the shit, and, you know.
And now you see documentaries, and a lot of people exclude Flipside, which is part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, is just to pull the thread in, a Flipside thread, and do a documentary. And it's starting out with a creation story, of course. I'm finding so many rich stories. And then if I can maybe inspire others like Al, or maybe X8. Do you ever meet X8?
I do remember.
Yeah, and get him, but he's also another stinker. So, but I have no resentments. I don't hold any grudges. If they want to share, that's fine.
X8, same thing, just not interested in talking about the past.
No, it's okay. I understand.
Some
But
people,
it doesn't stop me from telling the narrative. And they're always in my mind. They're always in my heart. Whenever I tell a story about Flipside, they're there sitting next to me. Just like when you go to a show, I look around and I see all my friends with me, even though they might not be there. They're in my heart.
Yeah.
So,
I don't remember
you
seeing
did it.
it again after 1980. I think it was the last time I saw him anywhere. So,
Yeah.
I mean, at a show, I didn't know him very well, but it was like the last time I recall seeing him anywhere.
Yeah, he slowly faded out. Went to us a few times when Brendan Mullen passed away. We talked a little, and Al, we did a reunion at a local pub about 2009, and I contacted Al, and he never responded. So it's okay.
I wonder if Martin stays in touch with him. I haven't talked to Martin in forever either, but I wonder if he stayed in touch with him, because one of the last times I saw Al was actually at Martin's wedding. I mean, we're talking like a long ass time ago, but that, it was when Martin was still writing. But I wonder if he had stayed in touch with Al.
I'm not sure. I don't know a lot of the. Was that a '90s staff person?
Yeah,
Martin?
yeah, Martin. I don't know what his. He went by Martin McMartin, but that wasn't his last name. His name was Martin. God, and he works for, I know, because I talked to him, I helped him. I wrote I wrote a letter for him for a job recommendation. I remember filling it and sending it. I was writing a recommendation for him. He got a job that was like administrative. I was writing from a classroom, writing something that was for administrative. Pretty amazing. So I was really flattered. But he would have been one of the last people that I would have known. that know how to locate them. You know, maybe
Yeah. Well,
Bruce never.
I mean, knowing how he knows technology, I'm sure he's viewing us somehow.
Yeah, he knows what's up.
Yeah, but now also
Yeah.
there's the drug culture within the scene in the 90s. I heard some stories from Cake. I'm not going to repeat them here because I don't want to, you know, say anything nasty, but you know, that's an element that I always consider. The drug culture could have affected him as well. Or he's into doing research and he's just, like you say, he's not interested anymore.
Yeah. Well, you know,
I'm hoping the later.
I was down there a lot, but I didn't notice the drugs, that there were any kind of drugs or anything like that, because I was there a lot. And
Good. That's good to hear.
people didn't even smoke weed around there. So I'm, you know, to be honest, if I had thought anybody was using anything, I would have thought it was speed, because those guys were always working. But I don't see, I didn't see any, you know. Now I heard the same stuff. I heard things, but all I can say is I was there, and what I saw did not indicate to me any drug use. And at the time I was, you know, and I was, you know, sober, and my brain was a lot faster and sharper than it is now. I would have picked up on it. So I didn't see it when I was around, but you know, and you know, Todd was always there working his ass off, and I didn't see, again, you know, if I thought there was drugs going on in there, Todd went on to do Razor Cake, so he was, you know, he was really all, you know, a business, you know, business isn't the word. He was he took the role of editor very, very seriously, and really, really kept things going.
He did.
You know, he did a good job. And so when he went over Razor Cake, again, that wasn't, to me, that didn't come from a drug culture, because he's still really a hardworking guy and getting stuff going. And that's not drugs. You wouldn't see that from drugs. I think that, you know, you'd have to ask Todd, you know, for, you know, his exact reason towards the end. But I know that you know, he really, really worked hard to try to keep things going, and, you know, to keep it working. It got to the point where they just didn't have the funds to do it. And and that was too bad, because you know, when you get Todd came in as like a lot of people come into the music scene, a little younger, a little more excited, hasn't been jaded yet, and you know, and idealism, and I think that he's done a really good job of keeping up, you know, taking those last days of Flipside and changing them into something different for the 21st century. So you know, there couldn't be Razor Cake without Flipside. That's, you know, I don't think that there's any denying that the magazine Razor Cake would not exist if there wasn't a Flipside, because Todd wouldn't have wandered into Flipside office, and the skills that he was developing there are the ones that he still uses now. You know, he and Sean are really publishers. You know, they really figure that shit out, and but it wouldn't have happened without Flipside. You know, matter of fact, a lot of shit wouldn't have happened because of without Flipside. But you know, if people outside of Los Angeles that are music fans realize how significant Flipside is, even if
They're
you
not.
know, you're feeling, you know, in the narrative of the Los Angeles, you know, people writing their books and doing their thing here, that Flipside hasn't been recognized in the world picture. That's just not true. You know, you can buy, you know, from collectors Flipsides from, you know, Italy, and especially in Germany. They're big fans of Los Angeles music there. So these men, you know, so Flipside's really, you know, its audience is worldwide, not, you know, it stopped being regional, you know, really. I would imagine by 1979, 1980, it was no longer just regional Los Angeles. You started getting the scene reports, and the other stuff started to come in. And I remember all that when all that was going on. Matter of fact, my when I was in high school, some of my first first art I did, I would take pictures out of Flipsides and then quarter them and eighth them, and then do the squares, draw the squares, and then put it back together. And one of them was a picture, and it was Steve Stiff standing in front of the Hong Kong Cafe, wearing like a long sleeve white shirt, but it had to be Steve Stiff because no one else other than Ed Colfer was that tall. So it had to be Stiff, and he was standing. The picture was probably this would have been about 1978 or 1979 Flipside, and I can picture. I have the picture in my head. It's so vivid, but that was like really. To me, that was like a really, really, that was my art. I used Flipside to cut up the magazines and make, repurpose it as art. And I wish I had some of that stuff because I'd put the pictures together. I'd cut up sentences, things that I thought were interesting that people were saying, and then make mosaics. And it was fun. I had a lot of fun with my Flipsides. It's fun. It's funny because, I just think about these great stories like Michelle Gaffari would share that they would drive her car and they would fling the germ singles off the antenna. So they'd put them on there and snap them off. They just offered me $500 for one of those records that they shot off that they managed to pick up and put it back in the car. I have one of them, and somebody offered me $500 for it. So they were snapping. I mean, here you go, snapping them off like it didn't fucking matter, right? Yeah. It wasn't that big of a deal.
I know it did. It wasn't. We'd always say, take Flipside and use it as you want. It's still kind of like that for me, except for my own little collection. It's kind of a strange, maybe that's the point that I'm not understanding about Al, is that he says, by talking about it, are you breaking an oath of punk rock, where it's kind of a known fact that we were friends, and why reveal this information? So there's times when I get very depressed about that.
Yeah.
But there's a pull on me to tell the story, so.
Yeah, well, it's hard for people to revisit. There's and there's going to be a lot of hurt and things that might come up, that people hadn't thought about or revisited, right? Popped into my head this morning when I was like, God, I remember drawing that picture, and that was because I met Steve later, and I'm like, dude, you're the guy that was in the picture I used to draw. I did about 4 different versions of that.
It was black and white, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there was another image right next to that of Donnie Laurie, who was a punk that used to hang out in the early days. And he's begging for money. He's like, he's on his knees and he's going, give me, poor Donnie needs money. I don't know if that's the same area, but
I bet it is.
He was a sad character, but it was fun to hang out with,
Yeah.
But there was a heavy in the early scene. There was a gay community of the older guys and the younger boys, and it kind of, as the boys got older, they would tell their supporters to go fuck off, and they would grow up. It was like a thing that you saw but you didn't talk about.
Right.
Kind of like with me in the 80s and drugs. I looked the other way and would just walk away from it, and not engage it, like with Gary Tovar, and his whole history is just so profoundly weird. But he loved the music, he loved the music.
Came from a lot of, there was a lot that a lot of stuff that was going on that, that by today's standards, you can't, without presenting this and setting things up, people won't understand even what the time period was like. They get somebody, I don't think they have an understanding that there would be like 25, 30-year-old men hanging outside of high schools to meet, to pick up on 16-year-old girls, and that was normal behavior. Like this was something, I look at what goes on with the whole Bill Cosby thing and think, Bill Cosby might have been like the extreme of that behavior, but you know what? I don't I don't remember I don't believe that that whitewashing what was going on with the way that young people were treating, kind of glazing over it.
Oh, it happened all the time. I know
Right.
several people. Yeah. I grew up
Right.
with that. I
This is-
experienced it myself. What are you talking about?
Right.
That
And
was
this is
normal
hard to look
behavior.
at. People are going to have to go back and look at that. And so you're going to be stirring up a lot of ugly stuff. So just be aware of that,
Yeah.
especially when you start talking about the role of women in the scene. You get enough women in, you're going to get a whole different way of looking at music.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm doing what I did in the early scene.
And
I'm walking around that. I don't see myself as a woman in the music scene. I see myself as a journalist, a publisher who's androgynous. I don't want to go down that path because it's not my path. And a lot of the women I bump up against, they're not very nice. They've never been. So I'm focusing on Flipside and the narrative. Now, if they want to speak about what they want to speak about, that's fine, but that's not my narrative.
There was that older group and then a younger group. But like anything, when the younger group comes up, their idealism is going to change and they're going to be a little bit more vocal and maybe a little more defensive about what their life was or what they did. Shit, I know I did a lot of things that I'm not especially proud of, and I certainly don't like to talk about it, but I'm not afraid of it either. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
like Janet, she just kind of, I just love that gal, but I've never been, it's like oil and water with us, but we know we would only get so close, we would repel each other. But if it wasn't for her, I'd be really depressed about women in the music scene, because to me, she kind of is what I think a woman in the punk scene should be, That's how I see it. You just do your own thing, and it just happens to be that you're a male or female or an androgynous, or it doesn't matter, But then again, there is the element that you talk about, that sexual thing was going on all around us, and
it was normalized, and it was a normalized thing. And so people don't, by today's standards, they wouldn't understand. They would see there was something creepy about some of the interactions, there's some of the way the structure of that punk rock scene was. But I saw it as totally natural, as mentors and apprentices. I kind of saw myself as a little punk rock apprentice, if nothing else, learning from the older group of folks. And a lot of what I understood about the music scene was what I got out of Flipside and Slash. So you go to the restroom. I'll see you later.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.